Okie doke. We are rolling. Cool. Let's see. Let me share a couple of screens here. There we go. All right. For the first couple of weeks, I got to report attendance, not because you guys were unreliable, because of the registrar's office. Know that you are alive. Presence. 2, 3, is it all right? How you doing, Ryan?
Not too bad.
Cool. Like, your project is starting to take on a shape. That's exciting, baby. You know,
Yeah.
it's forward progress. Oh, yeah? Anything good?
Not really.
We're like 3 whole days deep.
I know.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, thanks for that. And so the 40,000-foot view for today's session is to take a closer look at the thesis template file. Guess we're still getting acquainted with on Tuesday, and to the extent possible, we're gonna advertise sort of look at that like what one page out of that template do I need to be sort of thinking about this week is basically the temperature of that set of assignments sequence throughout the semester. If we have like 1 to 1.5 pages considered per day or class, then that's usually across the finish line by the end of the semester. And, you know, finish out the day, not even necessarily writing sentences, but a lot of these days are just gonna be like, what would I replace this boilerplate sentence with? Like, 1 or a couple of sentences worth of writing for that whole page on the template. So not too big of a deal. Before we get into that though, just a couple of sort of habit and hygiene reminders for some of our other assignments throughout the semester. Just a reminder for somebody presenting something in an area of research that is not your own. Catch a couple of those throughout the semester and write down 3 things that, in terms of the communication, formatting, diction, pacing, body language, eye contact, the font that they use, the things that they said or the way that they said them, the things that they avoided saying. That's what we want to start to train our eyes and ears to pick up on a much more functional level than like an undergrad would see a science communication or a science presentation seminar and sort of slide through it and look at the content of it. We're looking at the structure, the formatting, the semaphore, the simulating meaning behind the words and the figures and so forth. And what works for them as a proxy or a surrogation for what might work or not work for you. Everybody's got their own communication style, and it's important to get into the things that work well for everybody, but especially relating to the approaches and techniques that work well for you. That's even down to the level of things like if you're a very strong introvert like I am, recognize that in yourself. It's not a good or a bad thing, it's just something natural, right? And to the extent that you can, schedule some quiet time in the moments before the presentation instead of exhausting yourself and trying to play an extrovert and then getting up in front of a bunch of people and trying to run a successful science communication event. So whatever that looks like for you, this is a good pair of things, just anytime throughout the semester to help capture those things in a functional way for you. Also, the lab notebook. We have a slightly cynical and humorous, but technically accurate file to get through. So the time that we spend on documenting our work, things like a lab notebook or emails out to your advisor or anything like that, typing in metadata, that time is inversely proportional or is a zero-sum competitor against the time and energy and focus that you have to actually be productive and produce the research itself. Or think about,
think deeply about what you need to gain as insight from your analyses or anything like that. So very tired, very busy grad students have noted over the years that this very simple law equilibrates at a value of 0. Time for documentation is defined as equal to equilibrated time and defined as equal to your inverse productivity when you're so burned out from doing the research that you're not able to spend any time or energy on doing either. It's a math joke. But the wisdom for us out of this is that being a graduate student is a profoundly human exercise. Not a large language model churning out things and data and analyses and stuff like that 24/7 at 50 kilowatts per hour. You are a human being and you need to balance things like very, very real need to document your work through a lab notebook, whatever that takes shape as well as to do the work that you need to document. Okay, so everybody's work style is different. If you are neurodiverse, this solution set can be very, very different for you versus a neurotypical person. Budding professional to take a close inventory, a very personal inventory of what are your work styles, how do you need to work and live so that you can be productive, absolutely, but also healthy and sustainable long term. If you go into this with like video game industry, work hard, work hard, work hard, and then crunch mode for 6 months of 80-hour work weeks for 6 months, you could genuinely damage your health. And that's just not going to work. So whatever means or resources or hygiene or habits professionally or personally or health-wise, you need to be healthy and sustainable in this. That has to come first, period. Okay, this is a real thing. So I'm giving you guys explicit permission to both move through this class and move through your degree in whatever way actually gets you across the finish line sane, excited about where you're going next, and happy and healthy and all of that. Okay? Cool. Moving on from that. Let's set for our next class session to bring in whatever physical or digital lab notebook you want to use. You can actually hold it up and all learn from each other on what works for you in that regard. So if it's the Apple Notes app on your phone, because you always have your phone, that's your good. And it's ubiquitous capture. You can just capture whatever thought or insight or Eureka moment you have in there. That's okay. The Notes app is now your notebook. It's not going to be a physical one unless you like the kinesthetic experience of writing, in particular with pencil. Has at least suggested in some professional, like profession of science and profession of research, small and research studies, writing pencil is more effective cognitively for you. I think looking at the back of the screen. So that is something to consider for however you would like to check that box this semester. So for Tuesday's class, just be ready to bring in whatever it is. And if you forget this assignment until 5 minutes before class, just open up your notes app and title it My Lab Notebook. I'll never know. I'll never know the difference. Cool. So Oscar, we have an update for you on your project. Things are taking shape. Any, even just last couple of days, updates for you guys, Ryan and Nora, on, changes or updates to projects? Still keeping on? Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a valid answer right through the end of the semester. Really, genuinely. Okay, cool. What I don't want you guys to do is there is something called socially acceptable response bias, or
quality report bias. So I don't ever want you guys in this class to say something that is not necessarily true for your project, but that you think will make me happy as your instructor. Okay? So we started out the class on Tuesday saying that goal for frequent outputs from this class is a one-to-one parity on writing the outline of your thesis proposal throughout the semester. Then actually using that exact draft to finish writing the proposal in full prose format, since it's paragraphs. So that there's no writing it to keep Dr. Park happy, and writing it again to keep Akamani happy or whatever else. That's very, very important to me, and hopefully that's important to you guys to be very economical and efficient, so that everything you do in this class, genuinely everything, has some direct application without any further editing into your work. Okay? So I'm asking you guys to keep me accountable as the instructor. If I drift from that, you do what I assigned to you, call me out. That's okay. Please do. I genuinely don't want to go to bed at night thinking, oh man, hey, Oscar, write like this 5-page extent abstract for a project that is never going to do. I'm wasting your time. And there's value in practicing writing abstracts and so on. But we don't have a ton of extra time and energy. So I'm going to keep that off. Yes. Okay. So
Please call me out if we ever drift from the sense that you can directly copy paste or just resave any file out of this class for your thesis proposal and so forth. From here, we have to get into some fundamentals of research. So let's get after that. And this is going to be a bit of a lecture class session from here. All right. So let's see. Now let's jump right into it. Unless anybody has any questions or clarifications before we do, let's do it.
all right, so before we sophisticate it by talking about graduate level science, qualitative or quantitative, geospatial or conceptual, videographic, geometric, have the fundamental basic mission of understanding that if we collapse the entire corpus of all of human knowledge throughout all of time down into a two-dimensional circle, and everything under the curve, the area of the circle is what we know. So we have epigenetics in cancer research. We have stream bank undercutting relative to soil texture and composition. What you and I and everybody else in this building is ostensibly here to do is to start here, and by the end of this thing, in maybe 2 years from now, diagram looks like this. This extra part of your thesis. You are here, among other things, to create new knowledge. Okay? So we can think about this maybe at different academic levels. Like you think of an undergraduate field technician, undergraduate student who signs on to your research group to help you with the project. They are applying a technique to help gather data and may or may not be involved in the analysis that they want to get. But they are doing a thing typically that has been done before by somebody else. Maybe not in that time and place with those people or those fields or those wildlife organisms or whatever the unit of analysis is. But at the master's level, typically you are the one moving that project forward as the day-to-day functional, the executive operator of that research project. And your graduate advisor is there to help train you up in specific techniques so that you can be very fluent in those techniques as a professional when you graduate. Whether or not you go further into research or non-science, like professional practice, like a forester, whatever, civil engineer.
And then the PhD student is there to do typically what a master's student is aiming to do to learn, but also to create some of the method on how to. So you're generally not on the hook. A master's student, this is a good thing, for inventing some new genetic analysis technique or writing new proteomic software analysis suite or writing a new GIS module to do some new GIS, geospatial analysis that nobody has ever done before. That's exclusively the domain of the PhD student and doctorate student. So I say that to help kind of put a healthy boundary around what you guys are on. It's not all of that, and you're not. It's not that you've been wasting your time working in undergraduate development. You guys are here to have folks the level of ask for an undergraduate field technician in what's needed to. So this is the way that we typically understand how to create knowledge, especially in our Western cultures, and especially in the United States, with how we tend to do research, or think about research at least, in our cultural milieu. Have some idea about how that part of the world works, that phenomenon, the thing that you're studying or that you want to study. So that suggests a particular modality, a type, a scale, a timing, a place for a research project. And then out of that, you crunch numbers, you analyze interviews, whatever. And from that, your research report to managers, your manuscript author or your research note to your colleagues as researchers distills down the important, all of the facts, but highlighting the important facts and the insights built on top of those facts. Okay. Now, this is true. It is also a relatively small subset of all of the ways to create knowledge. So I want to also define the negative space of what we are not here to do. And these would be things like doing your own research on the internet. And by that, I mean maybe watching a bunch of YouTube videos of like alt culture content creators who are not applying science. They are stating things and generally selling nutrition supplements for some reason. Okay. So non-science and bad science are vulnerable to these four and a whole bunch of other ways to sort of mangle this process of expanding the sum total of all human knowledge with some application of some part of your irrecoverable life, right? We can't go back in time and try again. So we don't want to like set ourselves up to write a thesis out of your project that says, okay, we have solved this social question for all places, for all cultures, for all time. We talk to specific people in a specific place and setting about specific things, and this is what we found. That's not overgeneralizing. Overgeneralizing is trying to apply whatever your knowledge expansion is out beyond what is genuinely warranted to apply to. Okay. Selective observation is much earlier in the process. This would be things like sampling bias. Nothing, and Nora, I apologize in advance to you for this. It's not your fault. But I don't know if you've encountered this, but my wife. You may have noticed that in the United States, really across the Western Hemisphere, modern medicine is not calibrated or tested for you. Because I'm male and I'm white and I'm generally physically healthy. Won't make any assertions to my mental health or sanity, but I'm at least, physically healthy. And I'm sort of moderate socioeconomic status. all of us in this room are close to or above the top 1% in terms of wealth, income, access to healthcare, access to safe and clean drinking water, and stuff like that. So on a global scale, you can see how our medicine, all of our research, especially before the last most recent 20 or so years, like people like me got dosages for medicines calibrated to my body size, my metabolism, my genetics, epigenetics as a Caucasian male, and so forth. Okay. So that very, very strong and clear bias toward people like me for a study on the effectiveness of aspirin or the dosage window of aspirin or something like that is one form of selective observation. So for a quantitative study, a deductive, like an experiment type study, where we have fields and fields of different strains of corn, we're trying to optimize the amount of biomass produced on the cob versus lost in leaves or whatever is silage. We have very large sample sizes. Selective observation in a qualitative study might be, I should really talk to these 15 or 20 different people and have a real solid interview with them, but, these four really don't like people like me, so I'm gonna talk to them. It's gonna be easier if I talk to these other 16 that are more friendly to me. That's selective observation, and there's bias. Like the researcher is choosing to underrepresent what is really out there and could easily overgeneralize the conclusions they draw onto those other people they didn't talk to. Okay. Premature closure is similar and related to selective observation, but it's slightly after observation in the process. Observation is the data collection and data inclusion step. Premature closure is the tail end of data collection, where say you're running a physical field study on, forest stand nesting or something like that, like a mainline forestry field research project. But then we get an inland hurricane, and 2 of our 5 research stands are absolutely obliterated by that storm, like ripped up out of the ground and tossing mature trees like matchsticks. Happened in 2009 with the derecho. A lot of forestry professors with PTSD walking around that spring. Okay. For a project that collects some data, but not data that represents the entire needed time period or spatial extent or social extent and so forth. But we say, all right, we've got enough. Premature closure. And then there's the halo effect. So this is not inside of an experiment or inside the data collection of your procedure. The halo effect can take a couple of different, all of which are very insidious shapes. So if any of you guys have ever been scrolling Insta or TikTok and seen an influencer or content creator hawking some sponsored product on their channel, that advertiser is paying them to associate positively in your lizard hindbrain a happy or impressed or socially strengthened signal with their product. That influencer has nothing to do with the actual use or quality of that product, but think this person is influential or attractive or socially successful. And so your brain thinks, I buy this product, I might have some of those things. I might be able to buy and import those things into my life. That's why people do it. And neuroscientists hired starting in sort of like the 1980s and 1990s. Like everybody kind of knows, okay, this influencer, they don't actually change the quality of if I play War Thunder or not, or Raid Shadow Legends or whatever, apps and video games people are playing now. But these advertisers spend billions of dollars on advertising because it works. It genuinely just flat out works on you. Even though we think we're too smart for that and we see through it. So we don't want to try to introduce some kind of insight or truth or data or knowledge or wisdom out of data that doesn't support that by leaning on our reputation or our social standing as researchers, talking on Tuesday about how knowledge is power. People will look to you as an educated, as a credentialed person, as a skilled and trained professional, and they will trust you for things. So the halo effect is when you lean on that trust, not on the data. Does that make sense? Okay, so we'll talk more about the ethics of power dynamics and stuff like that a little bit later. But we just want to have that signal emitted pretty early. All right, so let's define a couple of technical terms. Empirical data are data that you gather through sensory input. And those sensors might be your biophysical sensors, or they might be cybernetic sensors, or they might be straight up electronic sensors. Okay, so sensors can be a LiDAR device or can be your own eyeballs. You and I are each processing between 109 to 115 megapixels of visual field information up to about 30 times a second. You ever think about that? That's a lot of data. That's a very high resolution, high frequency, relatively speaking data set. And your brain is constantly doing exactly this. Okay. So when we talk about use the term empirical or empiricism, that can be a positively or negatively loaded term in the discourse of research. Okay, so a lot of us in forestry do empirical research. Like when you're interviewing somebody and you record and transcribe like what they say and the answers in the interview, you heard that. So that's empirical research. There are other kinds of research that don't rely on direct sensory gathered information, like secondary document research, reading through old historic documents like old parish records or old people in Europe and the early United States used to record family trees, like in the first page interleaf of their like family Bible, for example. That would be a non-empirical form of research, reconstructing those family trees, for example. Okay, so data gathered through research is awesome. Sometimes some researchers will use this term in a negative way, saying something like, this smacks of empiricism, meaning you're just reporting a pile of data. You're not telling us the wisdom out of it. One way that this term can be sort of turned against you. So the lesson from that is, right, we definitely have to have data of some sort or another, but we don't want to just like vomit or dump data tables on people. We have to, finish off the course of that research project and extract and identify and communicate out the wisdom that can be for this class. Because linguistics matter, data is a pluralized word. I gather these data, not this data. Now, in the real world, linguistics would call this a descriptivist approach. Language is constantly shifting. People have been using data as a singular forever, since we started using the word data. But for this class, I want to be precise. Okay, cool. Let's talk about methodology versus methods next as a super important concept. And this is an especially useful one for you guys as you are really looking to do your first major professional level thesis. type project. Okay, so methodology is your mindset, reasoning, your justification, your philosophy of how you could accomplish what the research question, what the research project, what your research sponsors are needing to be accomplished. Methods are the recipe, the list of tools and techniques and steps that you actually did. Okay, so your methodology might aim you towards broadly qualitative research. Zooming in from that, ethnographic research. Zooming in from that, a semi-structured, grounded, qualitative category elicitation research project. And then your methods under that methodology would be, here's my list of people to initially contact and we'll snowball out from there. And then here's the list of people made de-identified as IDs or code words that we actually did talk to, right? So methods, what are you going to do? What did you actually do? Methodology, why are we going to do it? Why are we going to do it that way? And what are some key things to avoid? What are some key things to be sure to do? Make sense? Cool. All right. From here, let's get into very high level, but discussion of different research paradigms. Okay. So logical positivism is what a lot of us think of as like lab research. Okay. This is explicitly, typically deductive research. You start with a theory, apply methods, and analyze the data that come from those methods, write out your research report. Okay. The idea is that the universe is perfectly captured by imperfectly understood natural laws and mechanisms. Once you figure out like the physics equation for astromechanics, how planets move relative to each other's gravity fields and so forth. Once you figure out that equation, that is perfect. Mathematically perfect. You know exact precision depictions and predictions of where these planets are going to be at any given nanosecond. All right. Positivism. We are very positive about what is exactly there, where it's going to be, and why it moves that way. Very mechanistic view of all of reality. And that works for a lot of kinds of research. It is reducing very complex phenomena to guiding laws, knowable mechanics, and typically trying to express those mechanics as equations, structural equation models, like big flow charts, like this causes this, and this other thing moderates A to C as B. Element D in our phenomenon that we're studying is a negative or inverse regulator. So the more D there is, the less B we get, and so forth. Okay. This is very comforting for some people who need to know that if we just work hard enough, we can figure it out. If we measure it, we can know it. For some people, that's a very overly reductive. You can't boil certain things down, maybe, to equations. So a positivist view of love might be something like, well, love is an emotion. Emotions are sensations expressed by neurons firing in a brain. And neurons firing in a brain is just an expression of bioelectric reactions and processes in the brain, synapses, and movement across the forebrain, and reducing it all down to atoms and physics. Okay, so positivist view of religion. If you want to study religion, you have to look at people. And the study of lots of people, one of the studies of lots of people is sociology. But if you want to understand how societies work, then we want to understand at least how individuals work, and we can sort of multiply out the theoretical individual out up to the level of a society, and then we'll understand religion. But really, if you want to understand psychology, I mean, a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists work in, brain medicine and brain regulation with antidepressants and anxiolytics and stuff like that. And really, that's just, neurochemistry. That's just biology. Biology is just chemistry. We are electrically actuated sacks of meat organs. And chemistry is just physics. Like the molecules are just made of atoms, and atoms are just made of subatomic particles, which are just made of 11-dimensional vibrating strings. And physics is ultimately just math, right? So if you want to understand religion, be good at math. So this is a reductio ad absurdum, reduction to the absurd argument for why we would do things in a positivist way, showing sort of a ridiculous over reduction from religion to math. Luckily, there are other ways. And so for our qualitative researchers in the room, you might want to think more along the lines of an interpretive paradigm or any of the others we're about to talk about, okay? So the interpretive approach is that we cannot, full stop, know truly even what somebody else's experience of a thing is. We can talk with them about it, but what we receive from them as speech and as body language, nonverbal signals and so forth, like we as other humans have to interpret all of those things. Like, what do I think that they meant when they said that? Or what do I think that they were really saying when they weren't comfortable talking about XYZ? This is an interpretive approach. And it is much better than a reductive positivist approach on getting us towards empathic understanding. You ask questions and you listen. You ask clarifying questions. So when you said this, what I heard you saying was XYZ. Is that right? Or am I misapprehending what your experience of it was? Help me to understand what you are seeing about this, what you're believing, what you're feeling about it, what your worldview is relative to it. Okay. So when we talk to people and it's mostly us listening, now we can get into stuff that math really, really, really just is the wrong tool for. Okay. So the interpretive approach can lead some researchers to be active participants in the phenomenon that they are researching. So for example, when early sociology was getting started in like the 1950s and 60s and 70s, the time of very intense and rapid social upheaval and protests, civil rights era, all kinds of the environmental movement in the 1960s and 70s. A lot of researchers at that time couldn't separate themselves from the harm of the phenomenon they were studying. We'll talk about different ways that science has been misapplied to harm lots of people. And so they, as a part of their research, participated in protests, participated in things like advocating for civil rights, repealing Jim Crow laws, stuff like that. And that's not right or wrong. It is just very, very different versus a quantitative positivist researcher who wants to do something like, I just want to LiDAR this field and compute a bunch of statistics. And when you see research articles from the positivist approach written in passive voice, the research project was done by so-and-so instead of I did this research project, would be an active voice instruction. This is even written to remove the researcher from the project so that you're not reading this article because it was written by some rock star researcher, the halo effect. The research stands on its own versus the interpretive approach and the participant researcher. You might be joining the social movement that you are researching because it's that important, or you come to understand it as that important to you as a human and a researcher, that you can't ethically, in your judgment, separate yourself from it. Okay? So those are kind of two extremes. There's a lot of projects that are somewhere in between. And none of them are right or wrong, but some are much more suited methodologically to the research question that you're trying to accomplish versus others. Okay. That's a lot of big words. And me talking and you sitting there is, like, according to research, literally the worst way that we could possibly transfer that knowledge. Let's pause for just a sec right there. How we doing? Cool. Any of this confusing? Did any of this spark a stress response when you heard it? Like, is there anything along that spectrum that you're less comfortable doing versus something else? Okay, cool. Let's talk about idiographic versus nomothetic. Idiographic research is typically used for qualitative case study research specifically, right? It's looking at one primary unit of analysis. Like, if you want to figure out why Apple is a $1 trillion company, you don't survey 500 companies. You talk to everybody at Apple that you can get your hands on and ask, what's your secret sauce? Why are you guys this way? Why are you like this? Why can't we be normal? So idio, from which we get the modern word idiot, used to just mean unique, right? Case size is sample size 1 on purpose, so that you can deep dive on that one case instead of spreading yourself real thin with like a shallow survey, something like that. Okay. So you might, write a 500-600 page book about the secret sauce at Apple, and it's maybe personalities, it's maybe a corporate culture thing, maybe it's just a right place at the right time thing, whatever it is. Okay. Nomothetic research is the opposite approach. This is generally very, very quantitative in nature. Okay, so this is mapping on methods-wise onto the logical positivist world or side of things. All right, there's a sense that, okay, we don't know what the actual laws governing all reality in the universe are, but it is definitely some system of equations or something like that. And if we get a whole bunch of data, we can slice and dice those data. We can test experimentally to rule things in, like we tried this modification to the situation and nothing broke. So we turned this other knob, we added this factor, we removed that factor, we constrained this factor between a range of values, and something broke downstream in the mechanism. Okay, now I know that that range matters. I know a little bit more of some part of the pattern. Okay, this is what a lot of published quantitative research is ultimately driving at. So the person doing cancer research is ultimately pushing in the same way, but in a different direction, as somebody who's doing cosmic microwave background radiation, deep astronomy research. They're both going for the covering law model. They're just looking at different parts of the same elephant, very different parts. It's a huge cosmic elephant. Yeah. Idiographic. Not a unique case.
And then nomothetic, nomo means law, right? So they're the ones gathering up the idiographic cases and trying to.
No.
Like, would they be referring to the research produced by people who are going into a hyper-specific field?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, so nomothetic research is also hyper-specific. Like, you're doing a research project on like a very specific single mutation that causes one very specific cancer out of the 200 or 300 that we know about so far. And you do a ton of research on all of the people who have that, and you try maybe 3 candidate molecules out of a couple of million proposed by like a protein folding AI and so forth, right? So you're picking it apart using huge sample, as big of sample sizes as you possibly can, so that you have enough buckets to sort any of those individual participants or organisms or cases into buckets where we try to set up the covering law in this way versus that way versus that way. See which of those buckets actually shakes out as, okay, now we're a little bit closer to understanding the covering law for that kind of cancer. Good question. Good question. We don't generally see a lot of crosstalk between idiographic and nomothetic research because they're such completely different animals. Like a novel length book or Brandon Sanderson novel length book, 1,200 pages on Apple. It's hard to make that inform like a rigorous, double-blind, well-controlled, placebo and nocebo controlled, cancer.
Random research to do that because those use cases are so specific to the thing I'm studying. That would be kind of ridiculous to try and.
Right. And you can't run a well-controlled lab experiment on Apple. It just doesn't work like that, right? And that wouldn't be ethical either because you would want to build several Apple companies that have some part of them changed or broken so you can make sure that, okay, if this is broken, you won't get to the $1 trillion unicorn status. But that's a lot of people, that's tens of thousands of employees at the failing on purpose version of Apple. So idiographic research is ethical for that. Nomothetic research is, let's try and kill cancer 5,000 different ways. And, if we find one that works, awesome. Yeah, cool. All right, let's stop it right there. We got about a minute and a half left. We'll pick it back up with the scientific method. We've all seen this from, 4th, 5th, 6th grade on. But now we're getting pretty serious about running that cycle clockwise with deductive research or counterclockwise with inductive or ground up research. Okay, cool. I'm around for questions if you have them, of course. And what are you guys bringing in for Tuesday? Yes. Cool. Have meetings with your advisors as much as you can. Everybody's busy, week one, but want to get in the good habit of chatting up with folks who are going to be working closely over the next couple of years. Cool. All right. Around for questions if you have them. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah. You too.